Okay, having introduced that case, let's talk a little bit about some of the big conclusions from there. So the first is the court makes a pretty strong argument that it's not just the West Bank and East Jerusalem that are occupied, but that Gaza is also occupied by Israel. Saying that the West Bank and East Jerusalem are occupied is pretty uncontroversial in international law. Most international lawyers agree that they have been occupied for 57 plus years, or about 57 years now. But the debate has really been about whether the Gaza Strip is also occupied. For most international lawyers, when you think about occupation, what you think about is having feet on the ground and occupying army in the place. But Gaza, saw a withdrawal of Israeli troops in 2005 and of settlers in 2005. So there was some confusion as to whether Gaza could still be seen as occupied. The way in which the court understood this is that since Israel withdrew but remained capable of exercising and continued to exercise certain key elements of authority over the Gaza Strip, including control of the land, sea, and air borders, restrictions on movement of people and goods, collection of import and export taxes, and military control over a buffer zone that is, a kind of strip of land between the Gaza Strip and Israel, that it could still be seen as having some degree of effective control over the Gaza Strip. And so Gaza isn't occupied in the same way most occupied territories are occupied, but Israel still has obligations under the law of occupation because of the kinds of control that it exercises over so many aspects of daily life in Gaza. So the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, according to the court, are all occupied. Is that occupation illegal? Lots of people have argued that the occupation is illegal just because of how long it's gone on for. The court engages with this in a few different ways. It says there's 4 ways in which the occupation is illegal. The first is because it's been going on for so long, almost 57 years now. Occupations are supposed to be temporary. And while there's no hard cap in the law of occupation, it doesn't say you can have an occupation for this long or anything like that. The length of the occupation can suggest that it is illegal if it amounts to territorial acquisition or if it denies the right to self-determination of the occupied peoples. And the court ends up finding in this case that both of those conditions are met here, that Israel is effectively trying to acquire territory by force, which is not permitted in international law, and it's denying the Palestinians the right to self-determination. Israeli settlement policies also violate the law of occupation. I won't go through this in great detail, but I will mention a couple of ways in which the court finds this happening. The first is the transfer of its own civilians into the occupied territory. It is the expropriation of massive amounts of land from Palestinians almost exclusively for the benefit of Israeli civilians. It is exploiting the natural resources in the area, in the occupied Palestinian territories, primarily for the use of Israeli civilians, forcibly displacing massive numbers of the Palestinian population from the occupied Palestinian territories, and of course, committing acts of violence against Palestinians and failing to prevent or punish violence by settlers. So for all these reasons, the settlement policies themselves violate the law of occupation, the court says. On top of this, Israel is seen to be annexing at least part of the occupied territories, that is incorporating it into Israel proper. That is by applying domestic Israeli law throughout East Jerusalem, integrating with the West Jerusalem infrastructure, building a wall on the West Bank. All these things are helping it gain control over occupied territory and helping it pressure Palestinians to leave. Finally, through discriminatory issuances and denials of residence permits, discriminatory restrictions on movement, and practices around the demolition of property, you can see that there is a discrimination happening here that also violates the law of occupation according to the court. That discrimination grounds this claim that many have made that Israel is an apartheid state, and the court has, many have said, the court is claiming that Israel is committing apartheid. So the way to think about this, I think, is to look at Article 3 of the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which prohibits racial segregation and apartheid, right? So it prohibits both of those things. The court, in its decision, doesn't specify one way or the other, whether it's saying Israel is committing racial segregation and also apartheid, or just racial segregation. So The thing to keep in mind here is that the apartheid point is undecided. Individual judges disagree about this. Many lawyers have said there's a strong argument that there is apartheid, but the judges themselves aren't sure that they're all agreeing that there is apartheid being committed here. But there is a comprehensive finding at a minimum of racial segregation, and that's problematic enough on its own. Okay,